Why is the United States attacking its allies and giving comfort to its enemies? And what might that lead Donald Trump to do next as he seeks to end the war in Ukraine? Those are the questions which hang over today's meeting in Downing Street of Ukraine's President Zelensky with the Prime Minister, President Macron of France and Chancellor Merz of Germany. The new US national security strategy not only declares that Europe has unrealistic expectations for the war, it also condemns the EU for migration policies which it says raise, quotes, the real prospect of civilizational erasure, as some NATO countries are, it claims, on course to become, quotes, majority non-European. The document also accuses European governments of undermining political liberty and sovereignty, suppressing political opposition, censoring free speech, as last night Elon Musk went to war with the EU, having been threatened with a €120 million fine for the behaviour of his company X. He's calling for the abolition of the EU and tweeted an image of the European flag combined with the Nazi swastika. The former NATO Secretary-General Lord Robertson called the new US strategy very disappointing and alarming to the West. Here he is speaking last night to the BBC's Westminster Hour.
It was very disappointing and in many ways alarming to the West. It marks an America going back to insular and isolationist politics, which hasn't worked for them in the past at all. It marginalises the NATO alliance. It calls on it to stop enlarging further. It sees Russia not as a threat. It's harsh on Europe and makes commentary on internal European politics. All in all, this is not a good strategy to come out of the United States. And we'll see whether the rest of the American establishment follows on it.
Lord Robertson's view there, the former Secretary-General of NATO. Well, what is the United States' view, or the view of those, at least, who admire Donald Trump? I've been speaking to his former ambassador to the EU, Ambassador Gordon Sondland, and I asked him why Europeans shouldn't feel alarmed by a document that appears to talk as if it's who are the enemy.
Well, I think that was the purpose of the document, was to get them to feel a bit alarmed. Europe needs to take the lead in this entire matter. The United States can back up, the United States can support, but it's really Europe that needs to be out front. And that is really where Donald Trump is going here, because he understands that if we conduct business as usual, the way we've conducted business vis-a-vis Russia for the last, say, 30 years, it would be the United States that would be directly engaging with Russia, trying to resolve this, making whatever threats are necessary to Putin to get him to back down. And were he not to accede to our demands, we would be the ones in a conflict, and Europe would be watching. And that's not what Trump wants to do this time.
So when this national security document states, and I quote, that Europe has unrealistic expectations for the war, what does that mean? Does it mean that it is unrealistic for Putin to lose this war?
It is unrealistic for Putin to lose the war in the conventional sense. The war should have never began. Putin is absolutely the invader. Europe allowed this to happen in 2014. Europe allowed it to happen again when the troops and arms were massing on the Ukrainian border. And at this point, we're now in the conflict. And basically, Russia is going to need to get something to stop. Do I think they should get something? Absolutely not. But that is not realistic today.
But isn't it also unrealistic to assume that if Putin does get something, he won't come back for more? He may invade Ukraine again. He may invade another European state. He may simply seek to intimidate countries on his border until they deliver governments that are acceptable to the Kremlin.
You're 100% correct. He will try again unless Europe finally steps up and creates a major roadblock for him in terms of its defense spending, in terms of its own commitment of material and personnel, to make it clear that Europe is willing to get into that kind of a war with Putin, backed by the United States, but not led by the United States. That's where Trump is going here.
But he also seems to be going in the direction of supporting not European governments, but parties that are often described as being on the far right. This document that has come out, the National Security Strategy from the United States, warns that Europe faces, quotes, civilization erasure, and promises to support extreme parties against the parties that are currently in government. Why so?
I think Trump is trying to support governments and politicians that see the world the way he does.
Even if
And
those
that
are
includes-
parties in Germany that are designated by their own intelligence agencies to be neo-Nazis.
Donald Trump is not a fascist, and Donald Trump is not a Nazi. He isn't. I worked directly with him for several years. His children are Jewish. His grandchildren are Jewish. He is not a Nazi. What he's looking for people that believe in strong borders, that believe in assimilation when people immigrate to your country legally. A lot of the same principles that apply here in the United States. That's the direction he'd like to see Europe go.
But it's
And he
not the
also-
job of an American president to tell European who they should vote for, is it?
It's not a question of whether it's his job. It's a question of his perspective. And he's more than able and should be more than able to voice his perspective, very much the way Europeans, by the way, voice their perspective when there's an election going on in the United States. They would have much rather seen Kamala Harris win than Donald Trump. And that was very clear throughout the entire race when interviews were conducted throughout the continent.
He doesn't just voice his perspective, though, does he, Ambassador? This document talks about helping Europe correct its current trajectory, and the document complains about what it calls the censorship of free speech and the suppression of political opposition.
Well, in Donald Trump's worldview, the United States interests, and again, I'm speaking through his eyes and through his mind, the United States interests are furthered by having a more conservative Europe, period, full stop.
And what about censorship? Why this obsession?
Well, look at the recent kerfuffle over the fine that was leveled at X, at the former Twitter. I believe it's 140 million euro. The bureaucrats in Brussels are playing with Elon Musk. They don't like him, and it really, really reflects poorly on their view toward the United States.
I think
This
in
was
Brussels they
not a
might
good
call it
move.
the law, Ambassador, wouldn't they?
Yeah, check marks on a verification. Come on.
The historian Simon Sharma, who is a great student of United States history, a lover, I think it's fair to say, of the United States, says the historian in me knows that the Trump national security document will go down as one of the great betrayals of the free world, and all those responsible for it remembered in shameful ignominy.
Well, that's very profound, but I think it'll go down as one of the great wake-up calls in the free world. And it's time that Europe sat up out of bed, shook its head vigorously, and began to take leadership again in its own defense, rearming itself and reinvigorating its defense so that Putin doesn't even think about going any further.
Ambassador Gordon Sondland there, the former US ambassador to the European Union. Listening to that is the former National Security Advisor in this country under both David Cameron and Theresa May when they were in 10 Downing Street, Sir Mark Lyall-Grant. Good morning to you, Sir Mark. Absolutely clear, the Ambassador, wasn't it? It's meant to shock you, this document. It's meant to upset you. It's meant to be a wake-up call.
Yes, I think if the purpose was to set Europe alarmed, it's probably been successful. It is a remarkable document, and it is such a 180-degree contrast to the Biden national security strategy of 2022, because he talked about, competition between democracy and autocracy, building alliances, multilateralism, climate change, outcompeting China, constraining Russia. And this is the complete opposite. This is a reassertion of the Monroe Doctrine with the so-called Trump corollary based on America first, American preeminence in power in the Western hemisphere, and letting governments do whatever they like all around the world, except in Europe, where America is actually saying, we want to course correct where the trajectory of European politics is going. So it is a very, very sharp shift from 3 years ago.
The question then is what it means for this meeting in London of Zelensky with the three European leaders, with Starmer, Macron and Merz. Does it change anything, or does it merely confirm what we knew, which is Donald Trump believes, as we were just hearing that interview, that if you're going to do a deal with Putin, he's going to have to get something out of it?
Yes, I think the Americans have reached a situation now that they just want a deal, and they're not too fussed about what that deal means, provided that America gets some economic benefit out of it. That is the approach that the Trump administration takes to a lot of its conflict resolution efforts. But I think from the European point of view, they will stick to the position that it is up to President Zelensky to decide what is acceptable on the question of territorial concessions or the future of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, for instance, which is two outstanding issues. And for the Europeans, the key for them is that when the fighting does come to an end, as it no doubt will soon, that there are guarantees that prevent Russia coming back for more, and that Ukraine is left with a sustainable sovereign country that is free to choose its own future path. Those are the key strategic points for the Europeans, and I'm sure they'll be reaffirmed in the meeting today.
But does it mean that we've reached a stage where, in private, deniably perhaps, European leaders may want to say to Zelensky, look, you're going to have to look forward to a day in which, yes, we fight for you to get the guarantees you've talked of, Sir Mark, and we ensure your sovereignty, but you're going to have to give up quite a lot of territory?
I think Zelensky recognizes that he's not going to get back in practice, if not in law, all the territories that the Russians are occupied. But I don't think any of the Europeans are going to be pushing Zelensky into accepting a deal that he can't sell to the Ukrainians, because that will not end up in any sustainable peace process, and that's going to be bad for European security. So yes, they'll want Zelensky to be realistic, and I think he recognizes the need to be realistic, but I don't think they're going to be working on behalf of the Americans to push Zelensky into a deal that he can't accept.
Sir Mark Lyle-Grant, former National Security Advisor, thank you for joining us.
It's 23 minutes past 8 now.